Uh, Today our charge is to look at oaks of California, and particularly those that have our distribution in the East Bay Hills and part of the East Bay Regional Park District. And the first one we're going to be looking at this morning would be our Gary oak, rather rare in the district per se, but still there. And as distribution goes, this is one of the few oaks that goes all the way to Canada, and just barely, as a white oak, which means it's a relative of the blue oak and the valley oak. And yet this is one that can take on a pretty wide-ranging number of climates. From the oak woodlands, and I use that word sparingly, in Oregon and Washington, all the way down here to our north coast and all right down to the Bay Area, and it pretty much stops about there. I think we're looking at some of the southernmost of our Gary oaks in the exterior ranges, near the ocean, the outer coast ranges, in Las Trampas Park. So you have those there on steep east-facing slopes around Rossmore, that sort of thing. As far as the rest of the range of this, it continues down as a white oak, down the Northern Sierra, Cascade Northern Sierra, all the way to where it changes a form into a shrub version itself, and a short tree, all the way down into Sequoia National Park and Southern Sierra. And there it's quite lovely. In fact, it has some of the best fall color of all the white oaks that we have in North America, actually. And again, if you want to see that, there's many versions of that to see in the North Coast range. Most of the Lobate oaks, the red oaks, have the pigment, and the white oaks, the biggies, don't have as much. Well, this is one that does. So this goes from yellows to orange to reds. It's quite lovely. As far as a contrast, it's a shorter tree than our magnificent largest oak in Valley Oak, but it's very closely related. It does have a leaf. You can see this leaf here that has fewer lobes than Lobata, and particularly the terminal ones tend to be much larger. In fact, usually 3 larger terminal lobes that themselves are lobed. It has a semi-glaucous back, not too much, but nonetheless, it's an easy tree to grow. These in the Botanical Garden were found up at Jim Roof. I don't even know. Yeah, let's see, here's our little tag here. I don't know the year they were planted. Anyways, these have been here forever, and as white oaks have been pruned out a few times, they produce their own deadwood and have to sometimes be thinned, but nonetheless, they're lovely trees, and they're growing in this little grove, not unlike you'd find them in nature. So, in the Park District, they're a little more singular than this, and a lot of times, if you go to the North Coast Range subject to fire, as it is now, you'll find these burnt over and then re-sprouting in these groups, very much like a black oak or a red oak. So they kind of have that going for them. They're also an oak that has a little more of a forest connection. You'll find these integrating with firs and pines, probably more than other oaks, particularly the savanna oaks that we know of in blue and Lobata. And so I think it's important that you get that. They have the narrow furrowing of the bark, not the big plating of bark like Lobata. And the fun part is collecting acorns in the fall. And they usually are pretty, you find the right year, they are very abundant acorns. The acorns themselves are kind of large, almost the same diameter as the cap that sits on top, and the cap is very shallow. And we'll show you those in the video later. But nonetheless, here's a tree that I say it's less likely to be found in East Regional Parks, kind of a rare one, but nonetheless we're starting off with, because it is indicative of a northern oak, in this case something that actually, a species that actually takes more water and grows, can get pretty large, 60-70 feet easily, and calipers of 4 feet, but not as big as the valley oak. The one thing that this tree is, though, and very famous for, and we'll see in this garden, are the dwarf cultivars, or dwarf variations, and there are lots of them. Unfortunately, just this last 3 or 4 weeks, the area around Mendocino Pass, Anthony Peak, was burned over. And that was a site of some of the most incredible variations of them. They were given all kinds of names, from Quercus garryana breweri to Breweri samota. Quite a number of names that indicated these very small trees. And they had some of those incredible flame-colored foliage in the fall. And being low, they would not necessarily acorn very well, so they really aren't in trade very much. And I know that Jim Roof would always speak excitedly about having the option of finding on a collecting trip acorns of one of these small ones. So, and then they do that in the southern Sierra as well, except they're small trees there. They're 15, 20 feet. And they also have excellent color for this Sierra, which is kind of lacking given where we are. The books that are best in this case that show the acorns in contrast, we have the acorns on the page. Oaks of California, a very easy book to use. Eric will be referring to that later. The other thing is the map distribution maps that are on the online have come from a book such as this, the distribution of California trees, and here is a Quercus garryana in California, concentrated on the North Coast, Cascade Range, and down the Sierra. So that's just something that you'll have to look at, or at least you can access. This is online as well. This whole book, it's all public domain. So.
Here we have a black oak. It is in the red oak subgenus. It is deciduous and has fall color, and it is native to a variety of microclimate. There's a population at the China Camp in Marin County. Here in the East Bay, they are, for example, intermixed with the coast live oaks at Garrion. There are some out at Sunol where they are mixed in with the colder pines. And then there are plenty of these up in the Sierras. In the Yosemite Valley, this is the oak tree you see up there. They have lobed leaves with little bristles on the end, as opposed to the white oaks that have rounded lobes. And the acorns mature in 2 years. Here's an example of a 2-year acorn. See, they have a very large cup. And these here, where you see nothing but cup, those are the first-year acorn. And incidentally, this has the best wood and the most marketable timber of any of the California oaks. So this, where it used to be just sort of thinned out because they were going for the conifers, they realized, decades ago that this is lumber that's useful, so now it's being harvested.
Okay, as a side note to our mini discourse on the Garry oak, in fact the garden here at Tilden Botanical Garden has a lovely Kaweah oak, which is a southern Sierran variation of Garry oak, which we know is a northern oak. So it makes its way all the way down the Sierra, competing in forests and brushland and even upper chaparral, if you want to call it that. And you can see at the base it's multi-stemmed, it's the shrubby form it would be. And its leaf is quite a bit smaller. See how small this little leaf is. You get one that's not. Seems to have a few insect problems. You can see how small that leaf is. I don't know if you can see that. But it is a mini version. If you put it up against the other leaf, it looks just like it, just small. These two have excellent fall color. In fact, it's worth even traveling the southern Sierra, well, not this year, but up the upper Kern to see these in beautiful color. But we don't have these in the East Bay Hills, so just a side note.
So this is a interior live oak, Quercus wislizeni. It's very similar to the coast live oak. Some of the differences are that the leaf is flat versus enrolled at the edges, and some of the leaf margins are smooth, but you can also find dentate leaf margins on some of the leaves, so it's variable. And it's glabrous on the back of the leaf versus on the coast live oak. Sometimes you'll see little hairs at the base of the veins on the back of the leaf. You will find this in our interior parks. You'll see it at black diamond mines, and the difference is that you will find the interior live oak growing on the ridge lines, whereas you'll find the canyon live oaks growing more in the canyon bottoms. This particular tree here at the Botanic Garden is interesting because it has this bridge graft that's happened over the years, so that makes this an interesting tree structurally. The acorn is similar to the coast live oak. It's long and slender, but it has a much larger cup.
Here we have the blue oak. Blue oak is in the white oak subgenus. It is deciduous. It has leaves with shallow lobes as opposed to the valley oak. The leaves are smaller. And they have a bluish color, hence the name. The blue comes from a waxy coating on the leaf, and that makes it more drought resistant. So of our native local oaks, this is actually the most drought resistant. The acorns, and I couldn't find one right now, but they're kind of fat and plumb with a warty cup. This tree has a structural issue we could take a look at. There's included bark right here. That means this wood and this wood is not connected. There's bark squeezed in here. That makes it weak, makes it a possible risk for failure. So if you want to evaluate that, what you do, you look at, first of all, if there's a gap opening here, then it's becoming a high risk. If there's a gap in the canopy, where all of a sudden you see blue sky and it's not connected, that is also a risk factor. You don't see that here, that's a good sign. Then you also look at how much wood is holding it. So in relationship to the diameter, there's this much wood down here holding that. So that's borderline. It's not a lot compared to the diameter, but it's pretty strong as is. But let's say, then when you look at a risk, you always look at what is the target. If you had a picnic table right underneath it, you might want to move it. If you want to make it a little bit safer, you could take some end weight off, reduce it, and make it safer that way. But it's not a big concern like this. And these are native to the more inland parts of the East Bay Regional Park District, of the East Bay, and they are on higher ground than the valley oaks. The valley oaks are, of course, in the valleys. They like to, they can take the heat, but they need to be close to some kind of water source, whereas the blue oaks can be up higher in the hills. There's a lot of them up in the foothill. And the blue oak woodlands cover the most acre of any specific woodland within the state of California. In the foothills of the Sierras, mostly, also in the coastal ranges.
Here are the variations in this oak tree, which has puzzled people for a long time because they have a very decidedly different juvenile phase over here on your right than their adult phase here in the middle and left. And one has leaves with those little apiculate prickly tips, and that's on juvenile leaves that might be most likely to be browsed by deer. And then they up in the tree itself, as you get more of the acorn type producing limbs, you have leaves that are entire, the whole margin's entire. And in the Quercus chrysolepis here, we actually have a glaucous underleaf, quite different than a lot of other oaks. But this is the one that Eric and I like so much because it's found on canyon walls. It's found in rock. And we'll have an overview of it, but you see how it's extremely dense as a tree. And these two are all the ones you find on the canyon walls, along with other plants, but in Yosemite and other places that are famous. But this one's got a pretty sizable distribution, in Oregon down into Baja. But you'll see that it's named Quercus chrysolepis not because of the glaucous of young leaves, but this golden color, chryso is in golden, on the newer produced adult leaves. These are newer, and this is another oak that takes a season, sometimes even two, depending on where it is, to develop acorns. The most exciting populations I know, East Bay Hills, again on Los Trampas, we have a lot of up-tilted sandstones and that sort of thing. And then it's not quite as well found. It's found in Garin and a few other parks where there are shrubby versions on mostly north-facing, east-facing slopes. It doesn't need much soil. That's the deal. Here it is growing with tons of soil in a park. So it's become very dense and very thick, much more than it would in the wild. And the most exciting ones to me in the state are the Eastern Sierra ones. So if you ever have a chance to get the Eastern Sierra and see the ones there out of Horseshoe Meadows or the ones out of Independence, they are some of the nicest trees you'll find. They also have unusually large acorns. And this is called the gold cup oak because the cup, or the acorn cap, is very golden, kind of like the color of these these new mature or adult leaves. And it's very thick. It's very corky. It's not thin and plated like these acorn caps we've been seeing. Well, I have to say this is not exactly representative. But here is an acorn of the Quercus chrysolepis, the canyon live oak. Here's one on the ground that's actually mature. It's likely that this green one has not yet been infested by a weevil grub yet, so it may be a germinating acorn. Well, these are very tiny compared to what I'm used to collecting. The acorns themselves can get at least double in both dimensions of length and width, and have a cap that is you could put it on a golf ball and it would cover the golf ball. So they're very variable. And then you'll find all the sprouts at the base, like this. And in the East Bay Hills, there are also shrubby versions of this. Quercus chrysolepis frutescens. Frutescens just means shrubby. And they really never grow out of that. If you go to the top of Mount Diablo, you find a lot of this and the shrubby form up the top, where the winds are and the exposure is more ravaging. And then you'll also find them having quite a bit of tomentose, even almost stellate hair on these stems. So anyway, that's a canyon live oak. Some of the biggest locally, if you're interested in seeing them, are on Mount Diablo at Juniper Camp. Juniper Camp is a place you can drive to. You can drive right underneath these oak trees and get out and look at them. They're 4 or 5 feet in diameter and have giant scaffold limbs that are estimated to be 500 years old. So yeah, that's kind of a big deal.
All right, so here we have an acorn. What you notice is this shallow, sort of saucer-like, wide cup. Okay, here we have the valley oak. Valley oak is in the white oak group, and actually one of the common names is white oak. This oak is, of course, native to the valley, and the first descriptions we have of outsiders describing the Central Valley here it was just like a parkland with big trees well spaced out. And of course now most of that is all agriculture and cities and other stuff, but we still have a few areas, and we have in the inland parts of the East Bay plenty of them. So they have lobed, rounded lobes, and of course deciduous. The cones have shallow cups, they're kind of slender, can't really find one. And these tend to have a lot of the galls on them. I don't see any here. So this is the biggest oak that we have locally. It's the biggest oak in North America. I've seen a couple of books that said the biggest oak in the Americas. That's wrong. There are some bigger ones in Costa Rica that I go visit. But this is the biggest one we have in the United States for sure. They like valley bottoms where they can access some water, alluvial soil. If they can access water, they can take the long dry periods and heat, no problems. As far as structure, this one has good structure. These are known as one of the failure patterns, is what we call sudden oak, or sudden branch failure, where a big branch will break off on a still warm day. And the mechanism of how that happens is not fully understood, but the long horizontal branches that stick out of the general outline of the canopy tend to be more prone to have that happen. So if you have those in a high use area, you can reduce them, take some weight on them.
The largest of the valley oaks is up here toward the north part of the range. You can see it too is a rather endemic, like the blue oak, to California. 2 white oaks that are endemic. And as Eric was saying, that the trees used to be out in the Central Valley in these park-like settings, which were stunning, beautiful. And they used to be called water oaks because they were growing where the seasonal overflow from the rivers would just cover the land for weeks, and they could survive just fine. So it makes it a rather lovely oak to have in our landscape if you're lucky enough to have one. But I used to blow them with dynamite just to get them out of the way for pasture or for crops. I don't know. It's kind of a twisted logic now, but anyway. But just follow the Sacramento Valley down here, the San Joaquin a little bit here, but you can see they are all the way down in here to Ventura County. Thousand Oaks, they're all down there, the big ones, and then of course you have them in LA County, and then a few little ones here and there, but that's a pretty nice little distribution of a tree. It takes a lot. Now there are hybrids of these. This is, as you know, oaks are very promiscuous. They breed almost outside their particular subgenus, and in fact sometimes they do. And they create whole new forms, and we're lucky to be in this age of information where people can do DNA sequencing and find out what these hybrids are, and that's pretty exciting because it's up the number of actual different types of oaks in California by double. So anyway. And you also, this map also shows the sad situation in which there are many extinct populations here, especially from the east part of our bay, some of our central valleys. And it's unfortunate, and that's the way it goes. But anyway, they're even on the Channel Islands. So, here's the foliage. Oops. And there's all the lobes in the lobata. But here's the deal. Here's the valley oak. Oh, can you see that here? Mm-hmm. Valley oak acorn versus the blue oak acorn. So almost not quite double. And but this is, they're so variable. These are just some drawings. So anyway, we have an Engelmannii in the Leucobalanus white oak group, and they're very amenable to quite a number of habitats, even though they're found in an oak woodland brush or scrub zone. Anyway, found in a zone down there where they actually have to compete with fire regimes a lot. But right now they're being grown as trees that can take extreme drought, particularly in the interior valleys, and along not so much our coastlines, but areas that are interior, like Santa Clara Valley, San Jose South, and of course our Dabla Valley areas, and all the interior valleys of the North Coast, the Napa places. A deciduous tree with this nice glaucous blue-gray foliage, blue-green foliage, and they're being grown now as upright trees to 10, 15, 20 feet, and installed in line to be broadened based on the conditions there, and it's a much better form. But it's an example of our taking a plant that's from the south and moving it north as we find the climate moving north. And so that migration pattern that all horticulture engages in is exemplified by this particular tree. And it has pretty strong scaffolding, isn't prone to a lot of defects like included bark, and eventually, if it's old enough and it's been around long enough, and like some of the ones near the coastline of Riverside County, they actually kind of fan out, or they kind of spread out and become wider than tall, and they're beautiful trees. And this is a new tree that's kind of coming along, and people are growing a lot of it now, and I think it has great promise for the future. A lot of other oaks are coming from Southwest and Texas and Arizona and northern Mexico that are also being assisted north to see what they can do. And in fact, we know now from all the studies that have been done in the Central Valley in particular that and this is Joe McBride, one of our good plant gurus, and Greg McPherson and others have done studies that have shown that in 25 years, the temperature that we experience now down in Coachella Valley, near the border with Mexico, will be the temperature we have in Stockton. So what that means is that we are going to have to plan for the interior getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and the coasts getting windier and windier. So that's what's coming up, at least according to the pattern that we see now and the projections by people who are pretty darn smart. So. Okay, go.
Like these don't curl, but they don't roll.
Yeah, no, that's shade stuff. It's okay. Let's see. Well, you decide what the best position is. Let me give you the map here, Phoebe.
So this is the coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, and the leaves are generally enrolled at the edges and have bristles at the leaf tips. These leaves are not as enrolled as the leaves you might find up higher in the canopy. These came from lower in the canopy where they're more shaded, and so they appear a little flatter. The leaves also do have woolly hairs on the undersides of the leaves at the base of the veins. And here are some of the acorns.
Liz has some nice new ones too. So.
Nice.
And those are kind of rather shallow cap, fine little shingle-like involucral bracts, or what do you want to call the cap. And then this acorn, which can be sometimes pretty skinny, but usually about this size. This would be different than the interior live oak, whose cap comes down almost a third of the acorn, and then is very cup-like. And the acorn is much narrower. So there's two, breed.
So here are some leaves from higher up in the canopy. You can see they're a little bit smaller and also more curved and enrolled at the edges.
Sagrifolia comes up to Mendocino County and goes south all the way to Baja. Is not in the Sierra, is not in the interior. It is coast live oak, so can't beat it. So just reviewing our white oaks, we have the valley oak and the blue oak, and here's the Engelmann oak. There's the three, and then here's the Gary oak, Oregon oak. So we've got some white oaks there, and then we have a black oak group, a red oak group with black oak, interior live oak, and coast live oak in this group. And then the third group, we have a canyon live oaks and island oaks in that group. So we have those three groups well represented, and then we have all these Lepidobalanus, all these incredible hybrids, tons of them. So I don't know. That's for the scientists and the people who are good taxonomists to do.